Welcome to The Art of Medicine, the program that explores the arts, business, and clinical aspects of the practice of medicine. I'm your host, Dr. Andrew Wilner. Today, I'm pleased to welcome Dr. Michael Jerkins, President of Panacea Financial, a doctor-founded company that specializes in the financial needs of physicians. But first, I'd like to thank our sponsor, locumstory.com. Maybe you're curious about locums and how it might fit into your career story. But do you know all the different reasons physicians choose locums and how it works for them? At locumstory.com, you can hear firsthand stories as diverse as physicians themselves. There's not one solution for everyone. The variety of opportunities might surprise you. Locum Story is an unbiased educational resource. It has tools that let you explore trends in your specialty and compare different locums agencies. There's even a simple quiz to see if locums is right for you. Do your own research at locumstory.com. It's easy. And now to my guest. Welcome, Dr. Michael Jerkins.
Glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Okay, Mike, so, on this program, I've done several interviews with financial experts. And I think it's very helpful for physicians and, other health dentists, other healthcare providers to learn. We've had a couple of CPAs talking about what's different about doctors, and some wealth management people talking about, I like to put the word wealth in,
Yes.
in brackets, but that's what they call themselves. So tell us about your financial background and where you fit in to this picture.
Yes. So first of all, I'm not a CPA. I'm not a wealth advisor. I'm not a CFA. I'm a doctor. So I'm a Meds-Peds physician who was one of the co-founders of a financial services company for doctors. That's so full stop.
So I think that's pretty unique. You are a
I,
practicing physician who helped found a company to serve the financial needs of physicians.
that's
Is that
right.
right?
That's exactly right. So, I mean, look, it is hard to explain to someone who hasn't gone through it what it's like to be in medical school and have a child, for instance, and have a lot of medical bills, rack up on debt, apply for residency, move across the country with no income, arrive at residency, and be underwater each month while you're working 80 hours a week, right? Like CPA, wealth manager, they can understand it cognitively to a degree, but to really understand what it's like for most of us that have gone through training or are going through training, it just is a different perspective on the needs that our community has. That I think what we identified many years ago, even before we started, was that we felt as if no one was really working to try to solve our problems. They just simply wanted our money after we started making lots of money. I mean, let's be honest, let's call a spade a spade. So we set out on this journey. Our other physician co-founder is Ned Palmer, Dr. Ned Palmer. Ned and I did our residency together at University of Cincinnati in Med-Peds. We both were broke, both financially stressed, both felt like when we engaged with your average financial institution or bank, they didn't really like working with us. I mean, and I, to a degree, understand why. If I'm on an Excel spreadsheet and I'm compared with a bunch of other 30-somethings, but I have $300,000 of student loans and I'm making $50,000 a year, like they're probably gonna be like, who's this guy? We don't want to work with him. But as like I already mentioned, once I graduate from residency, they're all going to be banging down the door trying to get my business. So the thesis was you have a group of people that are highly sought after, highly qualified, can work for as long as they want to work, make as much money as they want to make, basically, that didn't have an institution that was uniquely going after them. And what we understood was our financial pain points in life cycle throughout a career.
That's fantastic. I want to tell this story. When I finished I did 2 residencies and a fellowship. And when I was finally in practice, immediately I was approached by financial advisors who presumed I had much more money than I had. And they wanted to advise me on investing in the stock market, and then take a percentage, right? I forget what do they call it? Assets under management, right?
That's right.
So I said, well, if I'm gonna take your advice, I think you should have some, skin in the game, right? So why don't you get a percentage? And I'll give you 10%, of whatever I earn in the market. But if I don't earn anything, and I lose money, well, then you'll be responsible for that. That way, I can rely on your advice. And they looked at me like I was out of my mind and literally ran out the door. And it's like, well, why should I take someone's advice who's not willing,
That's
to put
right.
some skin in the game? I
Yeah.
mean, they're going to make money either way, is the way they've sort of designed their program, right? Assets under management, they get 1% or something like that, regardless if it all goes up or down. That's insane. I think I'm going to do this myself. And
That's
so
right.
I frankly, I learned how to do it myself because that made no sense to me. I want a partner. So it sounds like you've tried to sort of make this more of a partnership than a predatory relationship.
100%, right? And like we speak all over the country. We work with dental schools, medical schools. We got, I don't know, close to 40 or so medical, dental, and vet associations we work with. And we're not pitchy. We're just educating doctors on financial topics that we're not taught about in school. And a lot of it, honestly, a lot of it we talk about, we don't offer any products for. It's just like, hey, here's what we know. We've worked with thousands of doctors now across all 50 states. Let us teach you some things we're seeing. Don't use us, use somebody else. As long as you're smarter by the end of it, cool. That's what matters to us. So let me just run you through kind of how we started. Was Ned and I, we tried hard in residency to get this thing off the ground. But as you might guess, working 80 hours a week and not having a banking experience. I had an econ degree. Ned did not have any formal financial training. We didn't get a lot of legs, or it didn't have a lot of legs with the people we needed to get it off the ground. So we tried and tried for many years. And then our third co-founder, Tyler Stafford, who was in investment banking, had a lot of relationships with banks. Also, I happen to know since the ninth grade, came in the fold is really where we started to be able to execute on some of these things. And we became a division of a publicly traded bank so that we could help doctors. Right now, just at the beginning, it was consumer doctors for personal loans, checking, and savings account. And that was all we opened with. But they were digital applications. We didn't make you have a co-signer. We weren't going to jack up the rates because you were in residency or whatever. And then we got a bunch of customers. They were like, hey, what do you do with student loans? We're like, well, I guess we could build our refi product. And we did. We had a lot of folks come to us and say, hey, I'm wanting to open up a practice, or I'm buying into a large group. Do you guys help doctors do that? Well, we didn't, but we built out that product, brought in the credit team from Practice Finance at TD, bankers from Bank of America, UMB, US Bank, Wells Fargo, all with practice finance experience. Basically gave them the mandate of, hey, we're here to help doctors. That's it. We actually don't bank anybody that isn't a doctor. So we built that out, and fast forward now, we've helped over 5,000 doctors across all 50 states. We've provided $500 million plus of financing to doctors and or their practices, and provided customer service that makes sense. So it's like 24 hours a day. You can actually call a human being in the United States to help you with your bank account, or open up a savings account, or a problem with your loan, whatever. We're there. That's the whole story of us. And as you can imagine, we've seen a lot of variations of questions, good moves, bad moves by doctors financially. And thus a big passion of ours is to provide education to try to prevent people from making mistakes, if at all possible.
That really sounds well, I know when I was a resident, I could never imagine starting a company. I could barely figure out how to use the ATM machine. I was in Montreal, and everything was a little different there. So, congratulations to you for sticking with
Thank you.
that vision. And it sounds like you've been able to help a lot of doctors. So, why are doctors different financially?
Well, I could maybe tell a story about my own residency. So this was in my third year. I was in the cardiovascular ICU, and we were a tertiary care center. We had heart transplants on the unit, patients with heart transplants, and I was tasked with taking care of them. That's a pretty big responsibility, right? And I'm the one really doing a lot of the work. Obviously, I have a fellow and attending there. But it was just interesting to me that on that same month, we had an issue with a car, my wife and I. And so I was like, look, I'm gonna actually let's instead of you know, tape and glue the situation, we're gonna actually go out, try to get a loan, maybe get another used car. And I engaged with a few financial institutions. We're talking about like $3,000 or $4,000 here. And I was rejected. I had a great credit score, by the way. Was rejected. Or I was said, hey, I was told, go get a cosigner. I'm 30 something years old, have a job. I'm entrusted during the day with the sickest of the sick, but during the night, I can't be trusted with $3,000 or $4,000. Like there is some discrepancy here in common sense. And so, but that I think answers your question of, well, what's different about us? Well, we don't really start earning our peak or even average earnings until much later than the average. Obviously, we have much more debt than the average on student loans, but even a lot of consumer debt that residents, especially, and students carry. And so when you go and you engage with a bank, and there's about 4,000 of them, and they pretty much all do the same thing, and they've done the same thing for the last 100-something years because the model works, they make money. They put you through the same little calculator that they would anybody else. And your debt to income looks bad. Your credit file might be thin, meaning you've never really needed credit. You've not engaged with borrowing. And so their score doesn't look good. So debt to income's bad. You have no data for us to assess if you're going to pay people back. And they're like, well, no, obviously not. We're go get a grown up to co-sign with you. And you're like, okay, all right. And imagine though, at any one time, there is 100 to 120,000 residents and fellows. So there's 100, 120,000 human beings that are doctors taking care of the sickest of the sick that essentially can't really engage with the banking system and many other systems, quite frankly, because financially they don't look like the ideal customer to these banks. And our philosophy is, look, we're lending to the license on the wall, not the spreadsheet. You're more than just a number. And that, I think, philosophy is very mission driven. We care a lot about our company, but quite frankly, there's demand there, and we've been able to service that.
Doctors are different too, from pragmatic, their schedule. Bankers are on banker hours and
Yes.
doctors are not. I remember when I was a resident, and this was the last century, but we were paid with physical checks that came in the mail, and you actually had to go to the physical bank and deposit your check. And that check wasn't all that big. And so it was pretty important to deposit. And I remember I never got done by 5 o'clock. So
No.
I remember one day literally running down from Mount Royal to downtown Montreal to the bank, approaching 5 o'clock. And whoever was in charge of the bank literally locked the door in my face because it was 5 p.m. And somehow that seemed to me a little unjust because I was also working 80 hours a week, trying to save lives. And here, all I want to do is deposit my check, which I earned, so that, I can pay the rent. But no special consideration was given for, what I do all day. They literally locked the door in my face. So I still remember that, and it goes back a long, long time. So I think it's nice to work with someone who kind of understands where you're coming from. And even physicians in practice, don't have time to kill, sitting in the waiting
No.
room, the bankers on, they're literally on banker hours, the money's earning, right?
Money never
When they're
sleeps. That's
when
right.
they're sitting there. It doesn't work that way for doctors. Most doctors are on a productivity kind of scenario. If you're not seeing patients, you're not reading, in my case, reading EEGs, nothing's happening financially.
That's
So
right.
that's interesting. When we chatted earlier, there was something about a recent survey. Do you want to talk
Right.
about that?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So, as you know, we're very much engaged in the doctors in training space. We have a lot of customers that are medical, dental, and vet students and their residents. And we did an annual survey. Actually, it's our first one that we're going to continue doing annually for medical residents and fellows. And it was asking them some questions, not just on satisfaction with training, but also on some of the financial topics. You can go to our website and find this, panaceafinancial.com, and find this residency survey. But some of it seems like things you could probably guess if you are at all in tune with what life is like for doctors in training right now. But it's pretty, I think, powerful to understand the financial stressors that the doctors face. And so we have data to back up how they are feeling about debt, how they're feeling about their take-home pay. We actually left the survey open for testimonials, like tell us a little bit more about your story, more than just a multiple choice. And it's on the report, but we had residents talking about having to go to food pantries. We have residents talking about basically going on like food stamps, these types of things, because they're working so much and making so little and supporting other members of their family while trying to learn how to be a doctor that it's pretty crazy. I mean, you think about your story, right? The banker locked the door in your face. However, that next day, you actually might be taking care of them in the hospital. And they sure as heck want to make sure they're getting the best out of you then, right? And it's the same thing now, right? We might not all be doctors, but we're all patients, all of us. And if you have 120,000 people, and if you include dentists and vets, even more. But if you have around that, just in training, that are stressed to the max with obviously the clinical load and learning, but the financial stress, the average debt of $200,000 or $300,000 if you're lucky, and you expect them to be on their best, to be able to be present and last a long time in the healthcare field. It's stark. And actually, we ended the survey with, would you recommend, or I think the question was essentially, would you choose medicine over again if you had to? And a large percentage said no. And now,
Wow.
of course, you might have some selection bias there of who participated in the survey and things like that. But I think common sense and just taking this, for people who engage with trainees, you hear that a lot. And it's quite sad. And the quote I think about is, every system's perfectly designed for the product it produces, right? And right now we're producing trainees who are financially stressed, emotionally stressed, and throwing them out into a very complicated healthcare space where many of them are not finding the opportunities they want and the control they want and the environment they want. And again, I drill this home of people listening that might not be doctors, might not care, but you will care once you need a doctor, and you want to make sure the system is producing not just adequately trained doctors, which I think we're doing, and the data is pretty clear on that, but those who are in a space where they can sustain excellent clinical care.
Yes, and that's one of the reasons I have this podcast, and to talk about sort of how medicine can be joyful rather than stressful. And it is an honor to be a physician, and yet somehow the day-to-day treatment of those who are in training and also working more and more as employees rather than
Yes.
employers changes the rules. So that's a seg to locumtenens, where physicians become self-employed, work, I hate to say part-time, because sometimes they actually work full-time,
Mm-hmm.
just at different places. Are there any specific services or financial considerations that Panacea would address?
Yeah.
There's about
So
50,000, by the way, now, locum-tenens physicians.
that's right. And it's growing. And I think the new generation of doctors is even more open to it as they see more flexibility and freedom there. What you might not know is if you are working locum tenens, you're 1099, right? So your tax documentation on your compensation is a little bit different. So you're in charge of understanding how much tax you need to set aside to pay. There's a lot more complexity there. The other thing is that you might not understand if you're listening is that when you go to engage with a bank and they say, hey, show us your proof of income, like give us some pay stubs. You're like, I work locum tenens. And you're like, cool, what is locum tenens? And you have to explain it to them. You give them a 1099. They're like, this doesn't count. You're like, okay, why doesn't this count? I'm a doctor. I make money being a doctor. Here's my contract. Here's my 1099. I can give you my pay stub. And they don't accept it because it doesn't fit in their little box of we need a W-2, we need it to be every 2 weeks. And that's just not the life of a doctor, right? So we built our underwriting to be more understanding of the 50,000 or so that you mentioned, which again, they're doctors. That's who we bank only, and they're making money being a doctor. Great. That's what we need. And people don't really understand how rigid a lot of these financial institutions can be on proof of income if it's outside of a classic W-2. We even see that with practice owners. If they're not W-2 practice owners, it can be very difficult. Even, they're making money, they can prove it. It's very difficult for that bank to check their box on their little form that someone decided 4 or 5 levels up in a boardroom that they had to check to give somebody any financing. So we're a lot more understanding of that group of doctors because, again, we know that their doctors making money as doctors. They deserve to have excellent service as well, even if they're outside of the classic employee-employer relationship.
Good to know. Now, barely a week goes by that someone wants to be my financial advisor. Tell me, tell me about that. Do you guys offer that service? And if so, why or why not?
Yeah, so we actually right now do not. So our services are really around banking. So for practices and individual doctors, we will be launching some other things here soon. But as far as and again, I should add, all of that is branchless. We have no brick and mortar branches, so no one's locking the door in your face at 5 p.m. because you have the app and the mobile banking that's best in class and access to an actual banker 24/7 or customer service 24/7. Your own banker, you have their cell phone, email, you can call them. Even if you're a med student with $5 in a checking account, we wanted to make sure you had access to a real person that could help. But on the financial advising piece, we get asked this a lot, obviously, and you and I both know, and I think most people listening, that we got a little bit of a target on our back as doctors, and it can be very difficult to understand who's predatory and who's in it for the right reasons. One of the first things I would say is ask for references first off. Okay, cool. You work with doctors. You got someone on your website in a white coat, and you got some cool little marketing things like who's a doctor you work with, and give me their name and number, and I want to talk to them. And especially for those who have student loans, you want them to demonstrate some capacity to understand student loans, debt management, public service loan forgiveness, the tax considerations there. If they don't understand student loans, and we know 75 to 80% of those graduating from medical school and dental school have student debt, then they can't answer your basic questions on your number one concern, probably right after training. And it's a complex system, right? I mean, look at the last year in student loans since they turned, it's about a year now since they turned it back on. It's been a mess. And understanding what the implications are for you is important. If they can't answer that question and you don't have a doctor that you can talk to that they've worked with that can demonstrate that they know what they're talking about, run away very fast. The other thing is they need to be a fiduciary, so need to have legally the same incentives of your financial health. And ideally, they have a decent amount of training and not a certificate that you can get online. No offense to certificates you can get online, but they need to have some demonstration of competency as well. But I really do think it's so tough because everyone presents to you as this expert and we love doctors, but then you ask them like, okay, can you name me 5 doctors? Like, well, I got 2. You're like, okay, let's take pause here. And I will unfortunately just share, we see a lot of bad experiences out there that then we have to connect them with people in our network that we have no financial relationship with that we know do a good job for doctors.
So basically, you're a bank?
Yes, basically right now we offer banking to doctors only. And as I mentioned, big part of that is the individual consumer doctor, but the practices is a big part of our business. So we're seeing more than ever people needing to buy into a surgery center or a group, or they're wanting to acquire an existing practice. Now I know what you're thinking is like, what, 75 to 80% of all physicians are employees, but that's still 20%. 20% of 900,000. That's a lot of folks still that are in this private practice space that your average bank, you can't just walk down the street and say, hey, I need help with my urology clinic. Like they're used to restaurants and, commercial general business, but a medical practice is very distinct and you need actual credit and banking understanding of medical practices. So we found that in the space for people looking for practice finance that most of them were geared at dental because dental practices are very similar across this. You go to a general dentist and then the one across the street is pretty much just like it. In medical, you might have a surgery center, a vascular surgery startup, a dermatology acquisition, I mean, we've done all of these things all the time. They're all very different, and you need the expertise to make sure you know what you're doing, you're avoiding any pitfalls, and then you have someone that can grow with you. And that's a big part of our business, is really supporting physicians that want to maintain independence and have that opportunity to be a practice owner or even a part owner of a large group, and allow them to practice in the way they want to.
Well, Mike, currently I'm an academic physician, so I don't have my own practice. But hypothetically, I need $1 million, right, to get
Mhm.
spiff things up in the waiting room, some nice artwork, and maybe some tools that in
Yeah.
the back room that help me do it. So, if how would I get in touch with you to get my $1 million?
Yeah. So panaceafinancial.com is our website. And on that, in this case, you would go to our practice finance page. You answer a couple of questions, and a banker you can schedule a meeting with even that day or next day. That's a practice finance banker. I will say again, probably the most common thing we see in the physician practice ownership space is, say, an ophthalmologist who's graduating residency and has an opportunity to buy into a surgery center or group, but surprise, they have no money. So we offer a practice buy-in product that's totally unsecured. It's a commercial loan, no collateralization we need necessarily of that, which is again, opens up the spigot for people who want to create wealth and start creating wealth. We have that opportunity. And we see that a lot in certain subspecialties.
All right. Well, this has been a great discussion. Is there anything you'd like to add?
No, I mean, again, I'm love conversations. So if people want to reach out to me personally, my email is michael.jerkins@panaceafinancial.com. I love interesting ideas, critiques of things I've said. I can be a little opinionated sometimes, but I feel very strongly that our community needs someone and groups of people who can really look out for them, because I'm not convinced that your average financial institution actually is.
Dr. Michael Jerkins, thanks for joining me on The Art of Medicine.
Thanks for having me. This was great.
Before we close, I'd like to give another thanks to our sponsor, locumstory.com, a resource where providers can get real, unbiased answers about locum tenens. I'm Dr. Andrew Wilner. See you next time.
This program is hosted, edited, and produced by Andrew Wilner, MD, FACP, FAAN. Guests receive no financial compensation for their appearance on The Art of Medicine. Andrew Wilner, MD, is Associate Professor of Neurology at the University of Tennessee Health Science Center, Memphis, Tennessee. Views, thoughts, and opinions expressed on this program belong solely to Dr. Wilner and his guests, and not necessarily to their employers, organizations, or other group or individual. While this program intends to be informative, it is meant for entertainment purposes only. The Art of Medicine does not offer professional financial, legal, or medical advice. Dr. Wilner and his guests assume no responsibility or liability for any damages, financial or otherwise, that arise in connection with consuming this program's content. Thanks for watching. For more episodes of The Art of Medicine, please subscribe. www.andrewwilner.com